welcome back to my channel. My name is Derek Main and I review literature. Books. I have 3 books today that I'm excited to talk about. I'm going to save the one I have the most to say about for last, but we're going to talk about David Albahari's Götz and Meyer, translated by Elias-Bursać, and this is Dalkey Archive. We're going to talk about the last of the Dara, Flee, and this is by the press that puts out all of his stuff, Aurora Books. And last, and the one we'll spend the most time on today, is a very new title, Something Gross, by Big Bruiser Dope Boy. This was put out by Apocalypse Party. And in so David Albahari, who we'll start with first, is a new author for my channel. But Dara, there are reviews, full reviews, long rambly ones, but I think they're pretty good, of The Lost Scrapbook and The Easy Chain, his other 2 novels. He also has a play. I haven't read the play. And then for Big Bruiser Dope Boy, his book released prior to this, After Denver, I have a book ramble where I talk about that. So let's start with the new author. So this is a modern classic. I think that that's sort of inarguable in literature. And it's a very thin novel, about 140 pages, and actually a little longer, okay, about 160. And it's a pretty simple setup. David Albahari is a Serbian writer who immigrates to Canada, I believe in like the 90s, but he's born in Serbia, 94. He's born in Serbia in 1948, and he sort of researches his family that were murdered in World War II, in the Holocaust, by the Nazis, by the Germans. And upon doing that kind of research, he ends up focusing in on these 2 drivers, Götz and Meyer, and does a fictional account. And what these 2 drivers do is they drive this truck. They're told, or they tell the prisoners and Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, political dissidents in the truck that they are going to Poland. And he keeps saying Poland or Romania, it doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because they won't make the trip, and they will, I think it's a total of 5,000 souls. So Götz and Meyer just make this trip back and forth, and there is a device within the truck that is going to kill all the people in the back of the truck as Götz and Meyer are driving it during the trip. And then they have Serbian prisoners. Started off with 5 of them, but it turned out to be heavier work than they expected, so they go to 7. And these 7 Serbian prisoners dig the mass graves where they then dump all the bodies, and as soon as that work is done, they're shot and put into the grave that they just dug. So it is an extremely bleak book, but it is real, and it is important to me to read this kind of work and to understand not just the history of this time period, but the personal stories that are often lost. So I do have to, because it is because of where the novelist is from, and also because of the translator, Elias-Bursać is one of my favorites. And of course, the topic of what we're doing about, I have to talk about briefly Das Drindic, because we're talking about the same, so the translator is the same for, let's see here. I really wish New Directions would, they're the top, wish they'd put their translator a little easier to find. Okay, so Doppelganger is by Celia Hawksworth, the translator. Belladonna, same, Celia Hawksworth. EEG, Celia Hawksworth, so I think I'm totally wrong. Okay, the one, Trist. This one has the same translator. But my point on that is not necessarily the translator, it's about the topic. And I just bring that up to say I still much prefer Dasa Drendik's work because I think that there are more experimental elements when it comes to the storytelling, the form, the fiction itself that draw me in as a reader. And I also think that she is able to connect living people and current sort of waves and events in a way to the fascism of that was particular to the Nazis and made it more universal. Whereas this is, I would say, a little bit more dealing with something like the banality of evil, the Hannah Arendt famous phrase, although there's ambiguity in that. And I do think that the brilliance of the novel, and it is brilliant, is twofold. One, the indistinguishability from the narrator's perspective between Götz and Meyer. So often it's Götz or Meyer. Götz, maybe Meyer. Götz, though it could have been Meyer. And I really like that repetitive structure to let it be known that they truly don't matter. You know, they are tools, and they've chosen to be tools, or they've been forced into being tools. Perhaps if they weren't tools, they would, be killed or whatnot, but they've gone along with it. So there is some of the banality of evil, but it goes a bit further into, I think, looking into their, not motivations, but that there was two people who were doing a job and how grotesque their job was. One thing that I think it brings about, which I'm particularly interested in, is this idea that the evil of the Holocaust cannot be just laid at the feet of Adolf Hitler or even his, most famous and well-known right-hand men, so to speak. I mean, it takes, there's a line in there that I love where it says it takes a lot of people to murder a lot of people. And I think that's what I'll take away from this. A good book, a great book, but it personally, there's someone else from the same area, although I believe David Albahari is still alive, and unfortunately Dasa Drendik's no longer with us, but I do personally just prefer her fiction in this same sort of genre. All right, so next, really briefly, is Evan Dara's Flee. I have, as I said before, full, very big reviews on The Lost Scrapbook and The Easy Chain, both of which had not only a profound impact on my reading life, but I'll easily and with no shame say a very big impact on my own writing. Evan Dara is much like, and I've said this before, so I'll just say it quickly, turning a radio dial, an AM radio dial, maybe in a part of the world or a part of the country that you are not familiar with. So the things that are coming through as you keep turning this are noticeable. I mean, you know the words, you know the language, you kind of understand the structures of what they're speaking of, but it still has this unfamiliarity, this strangeness that I find really alluring. Unfortunately, Flee did not work for me because what makes the first two novels work so well is they culminate into a broader story that is extremely interesting. And so they both act like puzzles, and you get the radio dial feel, but then it also sort of reveals itself to be a bit more than just experimentation, which I've talked about a lot. That's a preference of mine. Many people like just the experimentation. To them, putting it all together and tying it all together is in fact, in many ways, a bastardization of the avant-garde, or it's perhaps takes something away. Whereas I am the opposite. I do love experimentation, but I do not always appreciate experimentation for experimentation's sake. Now, this is not my critique of Flee. My critique of Flee is at 200 pages, whereas the other ones are in the 400s and 500s. I don't know if I'll edit out that intrusion or not. It depends on how hard it is to edit, because as you know, I just like to sit down and flow. I've even stopped doing notes. And if that turns you off, I'm sorry. As I've kind of said before, my concept here is I love books. I love talking about them. We are at a bar and I'm having tea, not booze, but I'm having tea. Sometimes I'm having a little bit of other things, but not today because it's a bright, wonderful morning and it's not time yet for that kind of debauchery. But what I like to do is I like to tap you on the shoulder and say, let me tell you about this book I just read. This is really exciting. So anyway, that works best for me by not taking so much of a critical lens and more of just like the love for literature, the love for discussing this stuff. All right. Flea's much shorter than the other two. Because of that, it does not have the tangential experience that the other two have, where that makes it so much a part of the joy is getting lost in those tangents. There's not enough time in something thinner to get lost. And ultimately, the themes that are coming through are too similar in my mind to the same themes that he was working with in the Lost Scrapbook. So while I think it was a good read and I enjoyed it, I don't think I'd ever ask somebody to start with Flea. I think I would tell them to start with either The Easy Chain or Lost Scrapbook, depending on what I knew of them as a reader. Okay, so we're going to end with the book that I'm most excited to talk about. It just came out. It was kind of a surprise release, and that is Something Gross by Big Bruiser Dope Boy. And look at this beautiful, beautiful artwork there. I mean, it's the thing that really draws me to that artwork is it is not gross to me. I find it sexy. I find it alluring. Even the hair, even the knotty knuckles. There's something tantalizing, I would call it, about it that really draws me in, but makes me feel weird about myself for being drawn in. So Something Gross is the story of a late 20s gay man in and around Denver, Colorado, that is amidst the kind of free love, free drugs, sort of whirlwind of hedonistic pleasures that many of us know very well from that time period of our life. But it does something quite a bit different with its perspective on these things. It is not a celebration of a drug culture or a sex culture. It's much more tinged with a real palpable sadness, a real deep longing for something else. And our narrator, it's told in first person, and this is rightly classified and should be as autofiction, which we'll get to in a moment. But the Big Bruiser Dope Boy is someone in this work who is, whether he professes to it or not, clearly yearning for a different type of relationship with himself, with the city, with the gay community, with his friends, with a lover, with drugs, with words. It's really a searching for a different sort of stream to wade into. So the character here gets involved in a relationship with an older man, and a lot of that sort of dynamic is discussed about why the narrator is drawn to older men. And there's a great section where he sort of describes it and says, you saw me with that kid my age, and you saw we had nothing to discuss. You know, this is someone who feels he feels comfortable in his own skin, certainly. So I don't want to say that. I mean, there is a confidence of the narrator that really shines through. But he feels that he has trouble belonging in groups and communities. And so you feel that insecurity as you're reading it, and it brings about really, really effective sort of epiphanies that the narrator has, that then you, the reader, have along the way, that kind of help you examine like your own relationship with whatever community it is that you're involved with, and what it is you're getting out of that relationship that you love, and what it is you're getting out that is not fulfilling enough. And there's just such a critical eye towards fighting to be who you are in so many ways. And I think the epigraph in the beginning might be, the first thing here is to anybody in the fight of being who they are. Let's talk about the title. So Something Gross. Something Gross is the best double entendre title for a novel that I have ever come across. Something gross does happen repeatedly in this book. There are some really, really descriptive scenes of not just gay sex, but also the culture and lifestyle of now, of that kind of swinger, open, not monogamous, sort of swapping, that kind of really aggressive male horniness. And some of that, at first you're thinking, well, is this the something gross? And I'm going to argue it is, but not in the way that gross is typically used. And here's what I mean by that. It is not gross as in like foul or disgusting. I'm a straight man, married to a woman, but you're not grossed out by the acts or about the eroticism or the physicality. Some of it is sexy. Most of it, though, is almost reported with a frankness and sort of a quickness in the way that it comes out, that it loses its luster and instead feels like a mechanical going through the motions of a bodily experience that many people attribute or usually use in a more loving sense and less of a transactional, I have this desire and yearning within me that I would like to release upon to you. And there's beauty too in that, and many of us have done that. I don't think that there's anything objectively moral or anything like that. I was a slut personally. I don't have any qualms with that word. I'm not going to use that word in regards to any of the characters in this book because some people do have issues with that word. But I just mean that to say that sleeping around or being promiscuous is not something that I'm personally going to have trouble with. But the gross aspect is the emotional attachment that the character is looking for, and sort of realizing that there's something gross about the way that the other characters and the other lovers, the other boyfriends are looking at relationships. I mean, I felt really deeply lonely, despite the fact that it's filled with people and filled with bodies and filled with expressions of love and lust. There was still such a loneliness because it seemed like there was a constant bouncing around for the next person, the next kiss, the next spar, the next high, the next orgasm. I liked these moments where the character cuddled on the couch and watched TV. Now, does that make me old, lame, and married? Yes, but I want to argue that that's what the character here is and was looking for. And so something gross is his perspective of seeing this is how this community is interacting with me, and this is how I'm interacting with the community, and gross. I want love. Okay, so that's the one thing. Now, the second part of the double entendre is the most exciting part of the book, and I can't say anything about it because I want you to read the book, and because it is really, truly one of the great magical reveals. And And then it becomes a little even more tinged with sadness because you want to reach out through the book and say, no, that's not something gross. That's not gross. That's not gross. You may feel that way. I promise you, being on the other side, and by other side, I mean having gone through some similar experiences and felt that way, that is not gross. It is not gross to want to love. It is not gross to want commitment. It is not gross to be yourself. It is beautiful. This book is beautiful. I'm going to read 3 quick little things that really drew me. First real quick. So the form, if you've never read Big Bruiser Dope Boy, he is very, you can see it's called a novel. An epic poem would also work. And he has a style that is very distinctly his, and it's very, very good. Big Bruiser Dope Boy, I wonder how long he will use a pseudonym. I talked about the pseudonym in the last piece. Unfortunately, I cannot talk about the pseudonym here because the pseudonym plays a role in the story. Okay, so here's the 3 things I want to highlight. He insisted on missionary eye contact. Okay, why do I want to highlight that? This is page 3, very early on. Because as I went back through it, I realized that what the writer, Big Bruiser Dope Boy, does is he insists on missionary and eye contact. That's the closeness you're going to get to his autofiction. It will be entirely nude. There are emails in here. There are copies of texts in here. You are going to see the entirety of it unfold. Now, from only one perspective, okay? So you have to go into that sort of knowing that, but one extremely talented writer perspective, which is, that's the perspective I want. I don't need to know the man, right? I care about the writing. All right, next, and the work. So he is going in this bit with his friend Joey to Santa Fe. So then drive to Santa Fe to meet Joey's friend for her art installation. Then return to Colorado. Then Joey would leave. It was going to be great. No, it was going to be traumatic and epic with the potential of us hating each other at the end. If this is not at stake, then what you are on is not a true road trip, and what you have is not true friendship. That has a fatalism and an excitement and an allure that really exists in the young. The kind of things that we, as we get older, still sort of claw for. And we get bits and touches, but that feeling when everything feels at stake as you're simply driving from one place to another on a long trip with a close friend, when all of your emotions are just right here and all of the problems in your life and all of the insecurities are just raw nerves, so anything could happen. Last thing is from 53. And this has to do with the relationship that an audience has with a writer. But I suppose that was the social price you paid when you made art that nobody else could make. Other people wanted things from you that you could not give them, projecting onto you their desires, insecurities, and warped ideas of you, themselves, and the world. And for someone, in the case of Big Bruiser Dope Boy, who is writing autofiction and is putting himself out there as rawly as you possibly could, I really like that because I think about, there's aspects of him doing readings for a prior book. I think it's Foghorn Leghorn, which I've never read actually. that he's discussing, and there is some really, really bitingly funny shit about the publishers that come into town. And like one of the publishers hops on a reading that Big Bruiser Dope Boy is giving and then just reads blurbs of other people complimenting her book. It's really funny. This whole thing is really funny. I mean, it's dark but it is funny. It is a gut punch, like just a tremendous work. But anyway, I like that. Well, so there's other times where somebody like calls out Big Bruiser Dope Boy, like he recognizes him and said, "Oh, I loved your reading." And that was really interesting. Like, how do you interact with the world as someone who writes autofiction under a pseudonym, and then are recognized and people maybe expect you to be a certain way? But this is the work, okay? It's a creation. It's brilliant work. I think you should read it. I think it is perhaps you'd get more enjoyment if you read After Denver or even some of his work that's available online. Like, get an understanding of his style first so that you can kind of hop in, maybe get some background of that kind of thing. But I do think that this is a tremendous book and something that is going to be appreciated many, many, many years from now, and is going to be looked in. He's going to have a whole huge collection of work by the time it's done. And I think this is one of the ones that is going to be really, really special. And he's accomplished something really great in it. But God, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I also think that's okay. That's the nature of this, right? I'm going to close it out. I see I'm almost at 30. We'll see if I can edit out that thing or if I'm even going to try. But where I was trying to go with that is, this is not the person. This is the artistic creation. And people want something then from the person based off the artistic creation. People want something that they may have projected onto the creation, because that's the way it works. Once you put something out there in the world, this now belongs to the reader. It belongs to the world. But that also means that he has to give something of himself to create, but then has to have that odd relationship with the audience where it's like, please talk to me, the person, and engage with me and not me as the work, because there is a distinction and the distinction has a difference. All right, so that's what I thought of that. Loved it. Something Gross, Big Bruiser Dope Boy from Apocalypse Party, which puts out great stuff. If you've never read any of their stuff, punk rock lit. What is that? People are gonna hate me for that, but I'm old, so like punk rock means something different for me. But it's good work. It's good work. And then Flee from Dara, and start off with David Albahari from Gotz and Meyer. Thanks, guys. Be good to folks. I hope you liked my flowers. I staged them. I don't just like casually walk around and I'm like, oh, look at this modern painting a friend of mine did in my beautiful flowers and my lovely cup. No, this is all artifice. Layers. Be good to folks.